Man, they real man, not with the gay shit. You niggas sick and gross me out, transforming into a bitch. I don't want that dirty pussy, little mama. I ain't spending no a trick. Don't need you to put me on, I put myself on. Just came up on another lick. Bills paid, belly full, in lack for nothing. Nigga, do me, stay in my lane. Fuck tryna be another nigga with nothing. Brainwashed and continue lied to our social media. Censor everything real good into destruction.
The Journal of Nature published a new study that states with 95% confidence that a catastrophic event will take place starting as early as 2025 and affect every human on the planet, disrupting weather patterns and creating climate chaos, including deadly droughts, the melting of the ice caps, and sea level rising. Almost every mainstream corporate news media source has picked up this story and spread the study, sounding the alarm for 2025. But is this just more hyped up environmental hysteria or an indication of what will happen in less than 2 years? The study predicts a, quote, forthcoming collapse of the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, also known as AMOC, a natural process which circulates water from north to south and back again in a long cycle within the Atlantic Ocean that helps regulate the Earth's climate, as well as carry nutrients to sustain ocean life. Whether or not the AMOC really does collapse in 2025 may or may not be true. Only time will tell. Perhaps it will just continue to ebb and flow, strengthening and weakening over time as it always has. But the real question is, why 2025? It seems this date has been singled out by scientists, intelligence organizations, and global elites as a time of great destructive and abrupt change, which will ultimately destroy the current state of society. In 2020, I produced a 3-part series called What Will Happen in 2025, which examines some of these predictions. The first was from Deagle.com, which predicted a massive drop in population and GDP in the US, Canada, and most European countries, while Russia, China, India, and other members of the BRICS alliance maintain their population growth and explode in their GDP. Why did Deagle.com predict this dramatic change for 2025? Since then, they've removed these predictions from their site, certainly at the behest of their partners in NATO, the NSA, and the UN. The second prediction for 2025 was made by Global Trends in 2008, and similar to Deagle.com, their report forecasted an end to U.S. dominance on the world stage and, quote, an historic transfer of wealth and power from west to east, signaling a shift to the BRICS alliance. They also predicted that a single international community of nation-states would no longer exist. Almost a post-global government prophecy. All of this from the U.S. Office of the Director of National Intelligence. The third and creepiest 2025 prediction was from Alice A. Bailey, also known as the prophetess of the United Nations, in her 1957 book, The Externalization of the Hierarchy, published by Lucifer Trust. She predicts illumination to mankind from the forces of light for the coming one, and that the crises of today will lead to a massive educational, religious, and economic change until 2025 AD. Quote, a great awakening in the human family and a major spiritual reorientation. And spoiler alert, she's not talking about the second advent of Christ. She's talking about Satan and his legions revealing themselves and the power structure they've used to control the world. In other words, the title of her book, The Externalization of the Hierarchy. So what will really happen in 2025? Climate chaos, famines, mass death, economic collapse, and a satanic deception to ensnare mankind? Only God knows what the future holds, but we can look hopefully to the return of Jesus Christ, even if we don't know the exact time and date of his arrival. So hold fast, pray, prepare for the worst, and do not be deceived by another supposed savior, especially an environmental one. Alice A. Bailey, described as the prophetess of the United Nations, also made predictions of a plan for 2025 in her 1957 book, The Externalization of the Hierarchy, which was first put out by the publisher Lucifer Trust, who has now changed their name to Lucius Trust to conceal their clear ties to Luciferianism and the Illuminati. The first stanza of the book states, quote, let the forces of light bring illumination to mankind and fulfill the purpose of the coming one. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. What plan is Alice A. Bailey speaking of? On page 193, she says, quote, the whole world problem has reached a crisis today. and its clarification will be the outstanding theme of all progress, education, religious, and economic, until 2025 AD. On page 281, she elaborates about the purpose of the plan for 2025, quote, "A great and new movement is proceeding, and a tremendously increased interplay and interaction is taking place. This will go on until AD 2025. During the years intervening between now and then, 1957 to 2025, very great changes will be seen taking place, and at the Great General Assembly of the Hierarchy in 2025, the date and all probability will be set for the first stage of the externalization of the hierarchy, a great awakening in the human family, and a major spiritual reorientation. Externalization of the hierarchy? Major spiritual reorientation? What is Alice A. Bailey talking about? Bailey believes Sanat Kumara is the greatest lord of the world, as opposed to the heavenly or spiritual, and she believes Sanat Kumara descended from Venus to Earth before mankind. The name Lucifer is one of the ancient Greek names for Venus, and this figure is at the center of the plan Bailey describes in her book. She goes on later to call Lucifer in no unmistakable terms the son of the morning, the prodigal son, and describes him as the ruler of humanity, active intelligence, self-consciousness, and creativity. Why would the UN's false prophet single out the year 2025 for the arrival or externalization of her Luciferian savior? The savior she speaks of surely isn't Jesus Christ returning to earth, because she claims to know the time of his coming, when, as Matthew 24:36 explains, quote, "But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only." So clearly, Alice A. Bailey's prophecy is not of God. But the question remains, what will happen in 2025? Mass extinction, economic collapse, political dissolvement, the arrival of a Luciferian Messiah that will invert the Christian ethos of Western nations, turning the world upside down on its head? Or are these prophecies false predictions, put out by obscure organizations as a psychological operation to demoralize populations across the West? I guess in 5 years' time, we'll see for ourselves what 2025 has in store for mankind.
Let me bring you up to date with a few extreme weather events across the world over the past few days. This was Vermont yesterday after what's been termed a 1 in a 1,000-year extreme rainfall event. 3 times the normal monsoon rain has swollen rivers in parts of India. At the weekend, big impacts from record rainfall in Japan. And at the end of last week, Spain, Zaragoza, saw heavy rain and hail right through the streets.
Around the world, a series of extreme weather events have intensified.
We could see some records broken right here in the state of California. So what I'm about to show everyone, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it, understand it, and even feel how hot this is. Look at this, Death Valley.
Perhaps the most alarming issue is not even on land. Sea temperatures off the coast of Florida are rising to abnormal levels, reaching 32 degrees, threatening to bleach vital coral reefs and endangering marine life.
Extreme heat is driving extreme rain in northern India, where unusually heavy monsoons have caused deadly flooding and landslides.
To the alarming streak of record-shattering heat, the Earth's temperature reaching an all-time high 4 days in a row. The average global temperature hitting its highest level ever recorded, with today possibly marking a new record for a 5th straight day.
But have a look at these pictures. These are from Spain, actually. Very heavy storms, heavy rain, flash flooding, and they've had a heat wave. I mean, just recently had extreme temperatures. Look at that.
And these pictures are from the north of the country. They show water, icy water, running through the street.
Tonight, raging rivers from record-breaking storms.
This is the worst this has ever been.
And the dramatic weather patterns reported around the world have devastated parts of India. Flash floods in the capital Delhi and in northern mountain regions swept away cars and houses and even knocked down bridges, bringing daily life to a standstill.
In India's remote north, rain is expected at this time of year, but not this much. The country is thought to have had the highest daily July rainfall for 40 years yesterday. Torrents of water turned roads into rivers of mud.
I never saw such rainfall in my lifetime. I never saw such level of destruction before.
Scientists say climate change is driving more severe weather everywhere, including here in New York State. A slow-moving storm dumping rain, causing flash flooding. More than 20 million people across America's northeast now under flood alerts.
They're calling this a 1,000-year event. It's only the second time ever that the National Weather Service issued a flash flood emergency. The last time was Hurricane Ida. My friends, this is the new normal.
Zaragoza in Spain experienced unprecedented flooding just a few days ago. Residents caught by surprise as their roads turned to rivers. At the same time, temperatures keep climbing. The World Meteorological Organization saying the planet has probably just experienced its hottest week ever.
The ocean is rapidly heating up. Global temperatures keep breaking records.
The hottest day in recorded history.
It started weeks ago. June was the hottest month for the planet on record. And then the news that shocked everyone this week. Planet Earth hitting its hottest average temperature ever on Tuesday.
Death Valley and the community of Furnace Creek are justifying their names. It could reach 55 degrees Celsius, 131 degrees Fahrenheit, by later today. So America, like Europe, is in the grip of extreme weather this summer. And scientists are warning, this is just the start.
The world order was made in 1945, at the end of a war. And a civil war can begin a new order inside of a country. The Chinese Civil War began their new order 1949. And so that's like a new beginning. They always come out of wars. And a war is a fight for how the system works. So we'll begin there. After the fight of how the system works, it's a great leveler. It gets rid of a lot of the debts and it starts over. And then there's a new power. In the United States, the New World Order, it was an American world order because the United States won World War II. It had 80% of the world's gold. Gold was money. It had the dominant military power. It had nuclear weapons. And because of that, we began the American world order. They carve up the world. Here are the borders. This group gets this piece and so on and so forth. And then they begin. And by the way, this has happened repeatedly throughout history. And so they start off with those new rules of the game. And you enter a period of peace and prosperity. And it's peace because nobody wants to fight the dominant power. The dominant power won. And there's a change in psychology really that you're dealing with, because quite often these things take place, they take a generation or more to take place, a lifetime. And the people who enter the war do so boldly. But everybody who enters the war and then goes through the war wish they never went through the war because it's so terrible. But they come out and the war is over. They want peace, they want productivity, and so on. And it's a great leveler, less wealth gaps and so on. And they work well together and they build a period of peace and prosperity that is a long period of peace and prosperity. But during that peace and prosperity, more and more prosperity takes place, and they increasingly bet on that prosperity. And people get more in debt. And so you see the debt levels rise, and you see naturally as prosperity comes, it comes in unequal ways, and some get richer than others. And so wealth gaps rise. And then those wealth gaps increasingly create opportunity gaps because the rich people have more resources to educate their children and of them the benefits. And so that happens over a period of time while the economy gets more indebted. And of course, as time progresses, other countries also rise. Those maybe that even lost the war, like Germany and Japan, they rebuild and they become competitors. And so what was a unique power of having won the war becomes less unique as there was more competition. And then you get a new generation of people who have a different mentality. They get used to those benefits and so on. And they are, let's say, less cautious in their financial behavior and so on. And so the classic ingredient also is that that country that wins the war also has the world's reserve currency. Because, okay, you need a currency to transact internationally. It's like a language, you need a language to transact internationally. And the winner of the war gets the world's reserve currency because everybody thinks that's the most stable, and they also want to save in it.
Want to trade and invest in global markets with ease? Build your portfolio with a one-stop investment app. Moomoo offers access to stocks, ETFs, options, and more. Click the link in the description and make a deposit to claim your free stocks.
So I think there are three big forces to keep your eye on. And when you see them in their cycle, then it's clear. First, are you earning more than you are spending? I want them to look at it as the country, but the country's nothing more than the aggregate of the people. And so when you look at those three forces, I want to make sure that they're clear and you could align them up and you could see where you are. Is the country earning more than it's spending and building savings? Or is it spending more than it is earning and creating debt? Because one man's debts are another man's assets. And when somebody is holding those assets and they're producing a lot more of that money goes down in value as they produce it to produce that buying power. And then that gets people bad returns. It produces a higher amount of inflation. And then people get out of cash and bonds. And that produces rising interest rates while there's rising inflation. And that produces stagflation. So I want them to get the mechanics of that because that's happening now. You could see it. This is not controversial. We are producing a lot of debt. We're spending a lot more than we're earning. And as a result, they're printing a lot of money. And the printing of a lot of money creates a lot of inflation. And with that inflation, cash is trash. You don't want to hold cash. And you get out of that. And that causes rates to rise. And that's one of those three factors. So you can see it happening. The second force is the internal conflict force, how you are with each other. Are you operating cohesively, common mission, and moving in the right direction? The system working? Or are you at each other's throats? Is the system threatened? Because history's shown when the causes that people are behind are more important to them than the system is in jeopardy. And that is a risky situation. It's a risky situation because it produces disorder and it can produce a form of civil war. And at those times, when you have that, you see greater and greater polarity. In politics, it shows up at greater and greater populism of the left and populism of the right. And populists want to fight for their side. They're not moderates. Moderates want to work together to try to find a compromise that's best for the whole. Populists appeal to their crowd by saying, I am fighting for you. And they will fight each other. And that fight can be at the threat of the system. So in history, for example, we saw 4 democracies in the 1930s choose to become dictatorships as one side fights to the other because they become so disorderly. And we have a system right now that you could see that it is possible in elections that neither side might accept losing. And so the system becomes in jeopardy. And you see that the moderates leave the system being moderate. You have to pick a side and fight. And so you see this in the French Revolution. There were moderates in the early part of it, that recognizing that there were problems and wanting to work together. The moderates got guillotined. Polarity began. The same was true in the Russian Revolution. The same was true in the Chinese Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, and so on. Polarity gets greater and greater as there's a greater intensity to fight. And that is the internal piece. So that's the second force. And the third force is the rise of a great power, the geopolitical force that's going on, that we're seeing today with China and Russia and so on, and how that's changing. Because when the power of a country diminishes, when we get weaker financially, or how we are with each other, and so on, there are greater vulnerabilities. Always the competitor that learns how to become stronger. Competition always happens. There's the establishment and then there's the new competition. And as they get stronger in all ways, militarily and commercially and so on. And that's the dynamic that we're seeing. The events that happened in the Ukraine, and that is bringing all this development internationally up at a little bit quicker pace. It's the same dynamic. There are two sides and there'll be neutral countries. Just like in the war, there was the Allies and the Axis powers, and then there are neutral countries. And so that part is developing. The US conflict part is probably progressing a little bit quicker. On the world order, the developments in the Ukraine, maybe I should put those in perspective. There is a very close relationship in the Chinese. So there is a competition in the world, and there's a dominant world power which is perceived as being overly controlling. And there are 5 types of wars. There's a trade war, there's a technology war, there's a geopolitical influence war, there is a capital war, and then the military shooting war. And we are in the first 4 of those wars in this competition. With China, we are in a shooting war of sorts with Russia and the Ukraine. We're providing arms, and so they're shooting. And so there's a military war going on, and we're in it in our way. So we're at those particular spots. And the capital war is sanctions. We hear the notion of sanctions. And what that means is they're economic. And the way they work is to shut off, to produce economic pain by either not letting them get at their money or not letting them get to goods that they can import. And these have happened through time. In Japan, that was what set us up for the bombing of Pearl Harbor, because the United States cut off Japan's oil supply, was in the process of doing that, and also confiscated its bonds, much the same way as happening now. And that put them into a corner that led them to bomb Pearl Harbor, and then we went to a military war. So that's where we are now. And that also is risky because it threatens the value of the dollar. Because right now, debt is dollars. Any currency, the way you hold it is you hold it in the form of debt. You don't hold it just in paper. And because there's a rising inflation, and because there's a lot of printing of money, and because there's also a greater fear on a number of countries that they too could be sanctioned, there is a selling dollar-denominated debt. So you're seeing that the bond market is going down. And so there is that dynamic that's going on. The capital wars are the ones that accelerate immediately before the military wars. Usually the coffers are empty, they're printing a lot of money, and then they're trying to use economics as a weapon. So we're in that part of the cycle. Now, in terms of how this will transpire, I think there are three big questions that we're going to get answers to pretty quickly. The first is, does Putin and Russia win or lose? I'll describe win as what he wanted at the outset, which is win for Russia would be to have the Ukraine be some non-threatening position, such as a neutrality, a guaranteed neutrality, and for Russia to have control over eastern provinces, and for Russia not to be economically devastated, instead to be maybe have it something like a decline in GDP, and for Putin to be in power. If those four things happen, then the cost of his actions will have been worth what was obtained from that. And that would be viewed as a win. It would be then also a loss from the Western countries. The world is looking at the power of American sanctions, because American sanctions are the greatest power the United States has, because it controls the world's reserve currency. That's the biggest asset. But in weaponizing the dollar, it is leading those to get around and not want to hold dollars because they get worried that they're going to be confiscated. So we see dollar sanctions power, we'll see how powerful it is. If it isn't very powerful, that's going to be a problem. While Russia is throwing in military, we are throwing in sanctions. And these sanctions don't cause lives. It's not a military war. So we're fighting it with sanctions and they're fighting it with military. If you didn't have that, how would you fight this war? It would be a much more difficult situation. And the third thing that we're seeing is how the world is lining up, which, there are in wars, typically Axis and allied powers. And you could see by the actions that are taken as to which are lining up. Who voted in favor of what at the United Nations? Who is allowing what? Who is trading with the other party? Russia actually put out a list who are friendly and adversarial countries. And that's making clear how the sides are lining up. So you're seeing those sides line up, and all sides are in preparation for war. And so psychology should change, and is in the process of changing, to realize that you have to think in terms of buying power, not the number of dollars you have. And you have to think how much is your buying power. And so the worst thing is to be in cash. Like I say, cash is trash, and to be out of the bonds. The next thing is to have a diversified portfolio of assets with a bias toward inflation-protected assets. And I would want to diversify between locations, countries, in terms of the investment based on the criteria I've just mentioned.